Before we dismiss the class, we'll sing out of our supplement number 39. End of soul. Dawn and sunset, fears and joyful deeds reflect His mighty ways, with the sea and sky before me. I will give Him all my praise. I will surely wake the dumb with praises. I will surely speak His name abroad. I will worship Him forever. He, my Lord, my only God. Stars adjoining praises from me. Lesser light will know my voice when I give my God His glory. Night will hear me and rejoice. I will surely wake the dumb with praises. I will surely speak His name abroad. I will worship Him forever. He, my Lord, my only God. Shout His glory, brothers, sisters, love His name and do His will. Like the sands upon the shoreline, are the praises to Him still. I will surely wake the dawn with praises. I will surely speak His name abroad. I will worship Him forever. He, my Lord, my only God. Now dismiss the class.
Morning. It's good to see everybody this morning. If you're visiting with us, I am not the normal preacher or teacher of this class. And of course, anybody here, if y'all was expecting Romans this morning, that's not what we're doing. So I'm not covering Romans for Bruce. Bruce does such a good job on that, and there's no way I could even touch what he does. So this morning's lesson, we're actually going to be talking about Judges. We want to kind of review a little bit from my lesson last Sunday night, and then we'll also do a little bit on Samson toward the end of class. Maybe a lot of it will be on Samson, but a little bit of review from Sunday night. So what books do we find the Judges in the Old Testament? Judges and 1 Samuel, okay? So the Judges come from only two books of the Old Testament. And that's Judges, obviously, and then, of course, 1 Samuel. There are how many Judges total? Anybody can answer? 15. So there's 15 total. If you break down the two books, the first 13 Judges are in the book of Judges, and then the last two are in the book of 1 Samuel. Why did God bring the Judges? Okay, deliverance from their oppressors. When we think about a judge today in our time, is it anything like the judges of the Old Testament? No, not really at all. What would be the difference?
Leading court related to laws and making decisions related to whether a person is violating law or not. Whereas the judges in those days were, like you said, military leaders or helping guide people through moral challenges. So it's not really a judicial setting like it is today.
Right, very much so. It's completely different from today's, from what we think of as a judge today. Of course, as you said, like a judge is more of a court official judging the law, and the judges of the Old Testament, I mean, they judge the people, but they also executed that judgment on the people as well. So, in my notes here, the judge comes from the Hebrew word. No, I'm sorry, that's the wrong one. Okay, here it is. Judge comes from the Hebrew word shaphat, and it means to judge, govern, vindicate, or to punish. So the judges of the Old Testament kind of done all four of those things. And we can see that out of all the judges that we see. Where was the timeline of the judges? Where does it fit in the Bible? Starts after the death of Joshua, okay, then kind of goes to where?
355 years later, I don't know when that was.
Okay, 355 years later. So that's right, it was a little over 300 years, about 355. But it started right after Joshua, and it goes into the Kings. Of course, you see first Samuel. You see Samuel there when they appoint Saul, and then you also see Samuel with David as well. And then they kind of disappear after that because Israel had asked for a king, and God finally granted them that wish. Can any of y'all name the judges? If I was asked myself that, I couldn't name them all myself, but I'll just name them all here. So all 15 judges: Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar, Deborah, Gideon, Abimelech, Tola, Jair, Jephthah, Ebzon, Elon, Abdon, Samson, Eli, and Samuel. And I may or may not have gotten all those names correctly. Is there anything about any of those judges you see different from the others? Or one in particular? What's that? Deborah, okay. Deborah is the only female judge listed here in the Old Testament. Are there any judges that stand out to any of y'all? Gideon and Samson, okay, really good. Of course, I did a Gideon lesson last Sunday night, and I'm about to do Samson here. Is there any others?
He had some weird things around him.
Okay. Anything in particular?
I'm thinking about an incident where it's too foggy.
I understand completely. So when I first put these lessons together, I did both the lesson I did Sunday night and this Samson lesson I did at Edna a few months ago. Of course, I kind of read through all the judges and read them, but I couldn't tell you all the details on all of them by any means. But there was several instances. Ehud was one that really stuck out to me. And of course, some of the readings on these judges is very short. And then of course, some of them are a little bit more detailed. Like Samson, I think, covers 3 chapters, 3 or 4. And then some of these others, maybe three verses. So they're kind of short. Let's see. Give me just a second. I got both these lessons right here in front of me, and make sure I don't miss anything. All right, so let's talk about Samson this morning. Samson was the 13th judge listed here in Judges, and he judged over Israel for around 20 years. And Samson takes place in chapters 13 through 16 in the book of Judges. And like I said earlier, he is the last judge in the book of Judges, and then Eli and Samuel that follow him are mentioned only in 1 Samuel. Who was oppressing the Israelites during the time of Samson? The Philistines. Okay, what do we know about the Philistines? I think I heard it earlier.
People.
What's that?
There were seagoing people who lived on the coast.
Okay, there were seagoing people that lived on the coast. What else?
They have their idols, and they, like so many others, were not moved out of the land when Israel came in, and they continued to afflict them.
Okay, really good. Anything else? So when I was studying this lesson originally, and it's one of those things when you're in Bible class as a kid and you hear all the stories, you have Samson, you have Gilead, you have Daniel, Joseph, and all those stories are typically separate and you talk about them separately, and you really don't put them in the whole timeline of the Bible. And sometimes I think we don't think of everything that goes along with that. And it's the same for me. I was one. I've read the story 1,000 times. I've heard of the Philistines, and it never dawned on me until I was doing this lesson, getting it together. Goliath was a Philistine. Okay, I never put that together. So if you think about Goliath was 10 foot tall. The Philistines themselves, they were also seafaring people that lived close to the coast typically. So they were also known for their great stature. Obviously, Goliath stood out a little bit more than a lot of them, but the Philistines themselves were known for their great stature, and they were also known as the people of war, which made them very intimidating for the Israelites to deal with. So we think about great stature. You hear the stories of Goliath, and you think, that's crazy. Anybody who's ever 10 foot tall, it's probably not really real. The Bible says it's real, so I believe it. But if you look in our day and time, most people you see 5 foot to 6 foot, some over 6 foot. Usually we see people over 6 foot kind of a taller, greater stature. If you actually look in the Guinness Book of World Records, I kind of looked at this last night, there is actually at least 3 or 4 people that are over 8 foot tall in the world right now, which I found very surprising. And then there was there was a few between 7 and 8 foot tall. So you think about the great stature of Goliath, that's still stuff like that. Similar happens today, even though 10 foot, and I'm sure even in his day and age, 10 foot really stuck out because he is known as a great warrior. However, with Samson, we know that the Philistines that he had to deal with, they were people of great stature, and they were also people of war. What's 2 things that we can say about Samson that kind of distinguishes him different from others?
Impressive strength.
Impressive strength.
Nazarite.
What's that?
Nazarite.
And he was a Nazarite. Okay. Those 2 things are impressive about David. Of course, his great strength come from who? Come from God. There's one other thing that really sticks with me. If you was to say, Samson, give me 2 things that really stick out. First one I'm going to say is his great strength. Second one I'm going to tell you is that he had a problem with the ladies. And that's the 2 things that really stick out to me. But the Nazarite vow, so there's 2 things I want to talk about Samson. One of them is going to be his Nazarite vow. The other one's going to be his birth. So let's turn over to Judges chapter 13. You are going to have to bear with me a minute. recently got a new Bible, and I'm still having a problem getting the pages to separate good. Judges 13. Mike, do you mind reading verses 1 through 3?
Again, the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord delivered them into the hands of the Philistines for 40 years. Now there was a certain man from Zorah, the family of the Danites, whose name was Manoah, and his wife was barren and had no children. And the angel of the Lord appeared to the woman and said to her, Indeed now you are barren and have borne no children, but you shall conceive and bear a son.
Okay, thank you. So what do we know about his mom here up to this point? She was barren. Okay, so she was barren, had no children. Does this remind y'all of anybody else in the Bible? Okay, I'm sorry, that all ran together. Somebody in the back said something. Anybody? Sarah, okay. Who else? Hannah. And Hannah, okay. Of course, Sarah we see over in Genesis 18. Sarah's barren and even past the age of childbearing. It doesn't really say that about Samson's mom here, that she was past, but she was barren up to this point. Of course, we know Sarah was past even the age of bearing children, and God said she'd have a child. And then what also stands out with Hannah and Samson's mom, besides they were both unable to have children, there's two things actually.
She told God in her prayer that she would give her son to him for service to him.
Okay, so he would also fulfill what?
He would be a judge.
Okay, he'd be a judge, and he'd also be a Nazarite. So both those things are common with those two. Let's look. The second, of course, we just want to talk about was the Nazarite vow, which we see. Let's turn over first to Numbers chapter 6, and let's read verses 1 through 8. And this describes the Nazarite vow under the law. See. Austin, you mind reading that?
Again, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the sons of Israel and say to them, When a man or woman makes a special vow, the vow of a Nazarite, to dedicate himself to the Lord, he shall abstain from wine and strong drink. He shall drink no vinegar, whether made from wine or strong drink, nor shall he drink any grape juice, nor any fresh or dry grapes. All the days of his separation he shall not eat anything that is produced by the grapevine, from the seed even to the skin. All the days of his vow of separation no razor shall pass over his head. He shall be holy until the days are fulfilled, which he has separated himself to the Lord. He shall let the locks of his hair on his head grow long. All the days of his separation to the Lord he shall not go near to a dead person.
Okay. So when we look at the Nazarite vow, as pointed out here in these verses, there's a couple of things. Typically, a Nazarite vow, it has a start and a finish, so it doesn't actually have to be your whole life. You can take a Nazarite vow from a certain point, and you can have but it is supposed to have a finish time, and so you can fulfill that Nazarite vow in a certain time. However, one thing that separates Samson on this is he was supposed to be a Nazarite from his birth to his death. So, and that was actually from the angel of the Lord here. When you read about when the angel of the Lord comes to speak with Samson's mom. So that was one thing on the Nazarite vow with him. And of course, although Samson's birth and his Nazarite vow are not unique to him only, they are something that sets him apart from most men in the Bible. Okay. So as I said earlier, the second thing that really sticks out to me is that Samson had a problem with the ladies. So Samson's story here from Judges 14 to 16 revolves around three different women. Y'all know who those women are? Can y'all name any of them? Delilah. Okay. The second one there's hardly any verses on, and that's just strictly a harlot. And then the first one is where Samson's story begins on his punishing the Philistines, but that is with Timnah. So Timnah is the first lady. So let's turn over to Judges chapter 14, and let's read verses 1 through 4. Frank, do you mind reading that? Sure. Judges 14, 1 through 4.
Samson went down to Timnah, and at Timnah he saw one of the daughters of the Philistines. Then he came up and told his father and mother, I saw one of the daughters of the Philistines at Timnah. Now get her for me as my wife. But his father and mother said to him, Is there not a woman among the daughters of your relatives, or among all of our people, that you must go take a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines? But Samson said to his father, Get her for me, for she is right in my eyes. His father and mother did not know that it was from the Lord, for he was seeking an opportunity against the Philistines. At that time, the Philistines ruled over Israel.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I didn't correct that, apparently. So her name's not actually Timnah. Timnah is where she's from. So she is a woman of Timnah, a daughter of one of the Philistines. So at this time, were the Israelites supposed to marry outside the Israelites? No. So his father obviously was not very happy about this. What's the one sole reason that Samson wanted to marry Timnah, that he wanted her for his wife? He liked her because why? Because she appealed to him. She was beautiful to his eyes. Okay? And I personally believe that when you marry someone, that you should think that your spouse is beautiful. However, that should not be the only reason that you are marrying them. And obviously, this does not turn out good for Samson. Let's read on. Let's turn to verses 10 through 17. Jacob, you mind reading that?
His father went down to the woman, and Samson prepared a feast there, for so the young man used to do. As soon as the people saw him, they brought 30 companions to be with him. And Samson said to them, Let me now put a riddle to you. If you can tell me what is within the 7 days of the feast, and find it out, then I will give you 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothes. But if you cannot tell what it is, then you shall give me 30 linens of garments and 30 changes of clothes. And they said to him, Put your riddle, that we may hear it. And he said to them, Out of the eater came something to eat, and out of the strong came something sweet. In the 3 days they could not solve the riddle. On the 4th day they said to Samson's wife, Entice your husband and tell us what the riddle is, lest we burn you and your father's house with fire. Have you invited us here to impoverish us? And Samson's wife wept over him and said, You only hate me. You do not love me. And you have put a riddle to my people, and you have not told me what it is. And he said to her, Behold, I have not told my father nor my mother, and I shall tell you. She wept before him in the 7 days that their feast lasted. And on the 7th day he told her, because she pressed him hard. Then she told the riddle to her people.
Hey, thank you. So what do we learn about the woman of Timnah here? What did she do to Samson? She nagged him. Thank you, Darren. She nagged him, okay? She nagged him to the point that he gave the answer to his riddle. At this point in time, how pretty do you think she was looking to Samson? He might have been thinking a little bit differently on his thought process there. So she nags Samson to the point that he gives a secret. And of course, he read that story there. He tells the riddle. Then after this, verse 20 says that Samson's wife was given to his companion who had been his friend. So after this situation, well, hang on, let me back that up. Got ahead of that. So they learned the secret and tell Samson, and his anger burns against them, and he kills 30 of the Philistines. And of course, he had promised 30 of them there that the changes of clothes. So he killed those 30 Philistines, got their clothes, and brought to these people. But then after that, Samson's wife was given to his companion, which did not go over well with Samson either. Let's look over at chapter 15, and let's read verses 1 through 7. Chapter 15, 1 through 7. Let's see. Alan, do you mind reading that?
But after a while, in the time of wheat harvest, it came about that Samson visited his wife with a young goat. And he said, I will go into my wife in her room, but her father did not let him enter. And her father said, I really thought that you hated her intensely, so I gave her to your companion. Is not your younger sister more beautiful than she? Please let her be yours instead. Samson then said to him, this time I shall be blameless in regard to the Philistines when I do them harm. And Samson went and caught 300 foxes and took torches and turned the foxes tail to tail and put one torch in the middle between two tails. When he had set fire to the torches, he released the foxes into the standing grain of the Philistines, thus burning up both the shocks and the standing grain along with the vineyards and groves. Then the Philistines said, who did this? And they said, Samson, the son-in-law of the Timnite, because he took his wife and gave her to his companion. So the Philistines came up and burned her and her father with fire. And Samson said to them, since you act like this, I will surely take revenge on you. But after that, I will quit.
Thank you. So from here, we see that Samson came right after this. The people of Israel come and asked him what he had done. And they bound him and brought him back to the Philistines, at which point Samson broke loose, and what did he do after that? You may remember the story that comes after that. Probably one of... What's that? Before that. He killed 1,000 of them with what?
Jawbone of an ass.
Okay, jawbone of the ass or jawbone of the donkey. That is, it's the second most people I think Samson killed at one time. And that's something that really amazes me, that he was bound with new ropes. Whenever he came to the Philistines, he broke loose of his ropes, grabbed that jawbone, and killed 1,000 of them right there. And that was his, like I said, second greatest slaughter. After this, we see second woman. Of course, this woman was burned with her father. And then we come to the second woman. He went into a harlot. And that's actually, you find that in Judges chapter 16, verses 1 through 3. Let me read that real quick. Now Samson went to Gaza and saw a harlot there and went into her. When it was told to the Gazites, saying, Samson has come here, they surrounded the place and lay in wait for him all night at the gate of the city. And they kept silent all night, saying, let us wait until morning light, then we will kill him. Now Samson lay until midnight, and at midnight he arose and took hold of the doors of the city gate and the two posts and pulled them up along with the bars. Then he put them on his shoulders and carried them up to the top of the mountain, which is opposite Hebron. Another time, which he shows great strength to do something like that. Concerning the lady, the harlot here, it said, although not much said of her, except that she was a harlot, we know that Samson was only there to fulfill his own lust, which was a sin. It was a careless act that almost got him killed by the Gazites. And then the third woman that we hear about with Samson is that of Delilah. Let's turn over, back saying in Judges 16 there. Let's look at verses 4 and 5. Clay, do you want to read that? Judges 16, verses 4 and 5.
Afterward it happened that he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. And the lords of the Philistines came to her and said to her, entice him and find out where his great strength lies, and by what means we may overpower him, that we may bind him to afflict him, and every one of us will give you 1,100 pieces of silver. So Delilah said to Samson, please tell me where your great strength lies, and with what you may be bound to afflict you.
Thank you. I'm not sure what Delilah's relationship was to the Philistines, but the lords of the Philistines actually promised to each pay her 1,100 pieces of silver if she would entice Samson to reveal unto her where his strength would come from. I'm not sure of that relationship, but she sure did press hard on him. Looking into the story there, she tries to deceive Samson 3 different times until he finally gives in and tells her where his strength came from. Let's look at verses 15 through 18, same chapter. See, JR, do you mind reading that? Verses 15 through 18.
Then she said to him, how can you say I love you when your heart is not with me? You have mocked me these 3 times and have not told me where your great strength lies. And it came to pass when she pestered him daily with her words and pressed him, so that his soul was vexed to death, that he told her all his heart and said to her, no razor has ever come upon my head, for I have been a Nazarite to God from my mother's womb. If I am shaven, then my strength will leave me, and I shall become weak and be like any other man. When Delilah saw that he had told her all his heart, he sent and called her the lords of the Philistines. Says, come up once more, for he has told me all his heart. So her and brought her money in their hand.
Thank you. So we think about the first woman from Timnah and how she had nagged him. Verse 16 here, the end of it says that Delilah had actually nagged him so much that his soul was annoyed to death. So he went from one woman nagging him to even worse. The nagging apparently got worse, that he was annoyed to death, to where he actually gave up his secret from God about his Nazarite vow and where his strength came from. Of course, we know from this story that Samson, as he slept, she had someone come in and shave his head, and the Spirit of the Lord departed from him at that point. And so he lost his great strength. And of course, we know from the story that after that, the Philistines caught him. What do they do with Samson when they caught him? Gouged his eyes out, and then what? Made him a what?
He was forced to grind.
Okay, he was forced to grind. Okay, he was forced into slavery as a grinder there for the Philistines. sadly, or not sadly, fortunately for Samson, though, his story doesn't end there, and I'm so glad it didn't. If you read on, what is one thing as he's basically in prison to them, what's one thing that started to happen? His hair started growing again, okay? And then, of course, the Philistines. Let's turn over to Judges 16 there. Let's read verses 28 through 31. 28 through 31. Stone, you mind reading that? Judges 16, 28 through 31.
Lord and said, O Lord God, please remember me and please strengthen me just this time. O God, that I may once be avenged of the Philistines for my 2 lies. Samson grasped the 2 middle pillars on which the house rested and braced himself against them, the one with his right hand and the other with his left. And Samson said, Let me die with the Philistines. And he bent with all his might so that the house fell on the lords and all the people who were in it. So the dead whom he killed at his death were more than those whom he killed in his life. And his brothers and all of his father's household came down and took him, brought him up and married him between Zorah and Eshtaol, from the tomb of Manoah, his father. And thus he had judged Israel 20 years.
Thank you. So from the rest of the story there, we know that even though Samson was imprisoned, he petitioned the Lord one last time that the Lord would grant him his strength. Of course, we know that the Philistines were having a great party at this time, and they had brought Samson in to entertain them. And Samson asked the young boy to place him between the 2 pillars that he could touch them, that the house sat on. And of course, Samson petitioned the Lord for his strength, and he crushed the Philistines that night, the greatest slaughter that he had to that date. So reading this, there were 3,000 Philistines. I think there were at least 3,000 Philistines in the house at that time. At least. There might have been even more than that. So his greatest slaughter to that point. One thing I really like about the Bible is, with the story of Samson and many others in the Bible, is it doesn't really leave a lot out as far as where they mess up. It's really encouraging to me to see a lot of these men of the Old Testament, Samson, Abraham, and many others, how they had messed up in their lifetime, but yet they repented of those things and come back to God, and God was just to forgive them of those things. Samson is no different here. Let's turn over to Hebrews chapter 11. There we go. Verses 32 through 40. Let's read those 32 through 40. Carrie Frizzell, do you mind reading that?
And what more shall I say? For time will fail me to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, of David, and Samuel, and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, were made strong out of weakness, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. Women received back their dead by resurrection. Some were tortured, refusing to accept release, so that they might rise again to a better life. Others suffered mocking and flogging, and even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, they were killed with the sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, afflicted, mistreated, of whom the world was not worthy, wandering about in deserts and mountains, in
Thank you.
Though commended through their faith, did not receive what was promised, since God had provided something better for us, that apart from us, they should not be made perfect.
Thank you. So even though Samson wasn't perfect and he made mistakes, he also corrected those mistakes. And this here is one of the reasons we know that. It's because he's found in Hebrews chapter 11, along with many others, and then others, of course, that are not listed. But Samson specifically listed here in verse 32. He's even listed with Gideon and David and Samuel. So that's one thing that we can learn from Samson. Even when we mess up, we can still repent of those things and turn back to God, and God will be faithful and just to us and forgive us of those things. Any questions or thoughts concerning anything?
About the 300 foxes, that's one that I always struggle with. You know, I think, how in the world did it had to be supernatural help, because how could you round up 300 foxes and tie their tails together, tie a torch to it? And I don't know. It just in my mind, I try to envision that and think that's just unbelievable. I mean, it's crazy, but it happened. But it's hard for me to. Think about that one.
It is. That's a lot of tails to tie together and a lot of torches to light. Of course, we know that went like wildfire when they did turn loose. I've always thought about that story as well. It's always one that kind of intrigues me as to how, of course, you had to have help from God for all that to happen. And there had been an abundance of foxes around there to catch 300.
Yeah.
So
I almost think it had to have been like Noah's Ark, where God just, provided the foxes somehow and made them be subdued for a period of time so he could mess with them,
Yeah, just to even keep them bound up to do all that. So it's a very intriguing part of the story. Any other thoughts or comments? I think one of the, of course, it had great strength and it came from God, but that story of with the harlot and how he picked up the gates of the city. The gates of the city were huge and very heavy, but he didn't just pick up the gates. He picked up the gates and the post at the same time and then just carried them over his head to the top of the mountain. That's another one, that would only happen with the help of God. Anything else? That is actually all that I have. So if there's no other questions or comments, I guess we will be done. Thank y'all for all your participation.